I'm DJ.
And I'm Andrew.
Welcome to One Shots Tavern,
a TTRPG podcast where we seek out new ways to tell your stories through different systems and games. Today, we are talking about preparation and campaign planning. I recently had just a brief back and forth with a mutual over on TikTok, Dragon Slayer. Go check him out. And it really kind of came down to this discourse around prep and what you should or shouldn't do. And so, spoilers, we're not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do because it's a very nuanced and personal conversation. But yeah, campaign prep, DJ, where did you start with this conversation? Because we can talk about all the sides of it, whatever. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about your personal experience with campaign prep, like getting into DMing and like what you started doing and what you thought it needed to be, and then where you've landed now.
Yeah, so I've done it two different ways kind of on the spectrum, right? I have prepped where, I actually did like the module style, like here are some canned responses that this NPC is going to give, right? And then I have also done I've got D&D in 5 minutes. Crap. All right, well, let's go for it. I wouldn't really say there's a right answer between the two of those, which is funny. It depends on what you want to do.
So here, right? I would say these are the main factors. Yes, preference is a huge one, right? Like, where is your fun? You're the GM. You are a player still at the table. You are here to play. So what is your fun? And then how do you fulfill your role as a host for this world, right? And then, so that's the big factor. Where's the fun and how do you fulfill your role? That's two. And then what system are you running is another huge factor.
Absolutely.
That's one of the biggest factors I'm finding. And what's another main factor, do you think?
Intention. I think intention is important, right?
And even not just for the campaign, like for that session.
For that session, exactly. There is I'll be honest. I have stopped doing the thing where I have the entire arc planned out, right?
Yep.
It doesn't work very well for me. I can
you
do
end up
it.
wasting
I can write
work.
You waste so much work because it's all hinges on your players. And if you guys have been listening to the Eye of the Tyrant, the actual play that I've been running, I have two players in there that are improv artists, comedians. And I was talking to them and they said very specifically to me, because they're also game masters and game master for hires. And they go, hey, we got this. Don't prep too much, right? And I was like, yeah, that's fine. And so what I do is I have possibilities. I'll have like a tree of possibilities that they might run into. And I don't have anybody connected to any one specific spot because they might go over here and want information of something they're tracking down. So like maybe he shows up in that spot that they decided to randomly go to.
Yeah.
But even then I'm not like writing out the scenarios anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Instead I'm just writing out my intentions. Plus the player intentions. I try to keep in a journal or my notes. This is what my players are intending, and this is what they told me they want. This is where I'd like to see things go. I have prepped like big bad stuff.
Yeah,
for the
totally.
campaign, right? But like, I don't even know if they're going to go for that.
Yep.
And so I have to make sure that I have all sorts of different options that is going to be fun and satisfying for them. And I found lately that using this method for all of my campaigns has paid off great. I keep hearing the same thing over and over. DJ, that was the best session that we've done so far. This is great. Right. I can't wait to see where things are going. And I'm just like, yup.
I did nothing.
Planned.
Yeah, totally. For a long time, I could have stolen this from somebody else. So if you're listening, you're like, hey, Matt Mercer said this and you're not original. That's fine. Just let me know. Because we all steal from each other. That's being a DM. I am not intending to. But the thing that I call it is floating narrative. And so I have when I'm prepping a campaign, right? I'm not talking like a 3-shot, a few shot, whatever. Like this is a campaign, right? Potentially a year of my life playing in a game. I'm a huge proponent for building out your world. Now, if you're playing in Faerun,
Oh yeah,
the 5e world, that comes down to, in
where
my
it's just a
opinion,
Google away.
it's a Google away. There's two things you got to run into. If you're running an established setting, I believe there is a degree, especially if your players are familiar with the setting, of responsibility that falls on you that by choosing that as a group, that you're going to familiarize yourself with that setting. So for Faerun, that's learning about the cataclysms of the past and who is Karsus and Karsus's folly and what happened to the goddess Mistral as she got sundered and what did the first and second
Right.
sundering do and how are they different and how does that inform? That may not be important for every Faerun campaign, but that informed a ton out of a huge one that I ran for a while, and it affects a lot of campaigns within Faerun because those events defined a lot of how magic works in the world. And
Oh
that's
yeah,
a
absolutely.
huge question for players that say, I'm going to play a wizard. Or even worse, I'm going to play an archaeologist. Or like, I'm going to play
Oh yeah,
somebody that cares about the history. Or
yeah,
like, we're doing dungeon delving. Where did these dungeons come from? So it really
yeah.
comes down to like, yes, what is the campaign you're running?
Mhm.
What are the themes you're going for? And then that's a kind of come back to the floating narrative thing. So if I'm deciding I'm running something in Faerun versus a fully whole cloth unique thing, I'm going to familiarize myself as much as I can. I won't be perfect with it, with the parts of the setting that fit some of the themes and the goals that I personally have for this
Right.
campaign, and marrying that with goals and desires that are present in the players. Again, back to the wizard idea. If you have a wizard in your game that's like, hey, I just want to learn about magic. Like, I want my character to learn about
Mhm.
magic and find spells and like dive deep into arcane lore. You should represent that in the game for them to help them have fun.
Yeah, whether it's going to be a module or it's
Right.
your own homebrew world, like you want them to be able to pick the pieces that you're putting down up. And that
Yeah.
means that you are going to need some lore prep in order to give them those pieces. I've had a few situations where I came up with some absolutely bomb lore in the middle of a session. In
Yeah.
fact, it's influenced 3 campaigns. In one of my worlds, they were down in the Underdark and they were like looking around and they stumbled upon these ruins and I was like, "Oh crap, I have no idea what these ruins are." And like they're rolling history checks and I'm like, "Oh, long before your people,
Right.
there was another group of people and the gods wiped them out because they decided they were going to try and become the gods."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, that's amazing, amazing." And I
You're
was
like,
like,
I just made
I
that
gave them
up.
like a name and I
Yeah.
was like, "Cool, I just made this up." And then I had to like write it all down because I came up with all this
Yeah.
lore. So sometimes that works amazing.
But the
Mhm.
floating narrative thing, simply put, rather than I was getting tangential with it, the floating narrative thing, simply put, is taking those goals, those kind of pillars of the game you want to run, and then say, these are non-linear. These
Right.
exist in the world and they can go wherever they want. They can tie in however I want in the moment. And I've prepared the parts of that it will potentially have mechanical or lore or whatever weight that you need them to have for your
Right.
game. So that wizard example, right? You spend time because you as a table during session 0 decide we're going to run a Faerun game. We're not running a module and we want to explore Faerun. There are
Right.
players that desperately want to do that because they're familiar with Faerun, but they've felt
Mhm.
maybe railroaded by a specific campaign and been like, but I want to go check out Neverwinter or I want to go check out whatever.
Right.
The nice
Yeah,
thing
you're
is,
telling me.
the nice thing is, with an established setting, you can like between sessions prepare in advance for those things, and that's all you're gonna need, right? Like you're gonna let the player's interest guide you in where you're going next, and then you take those big floating narrative moments that you want to tie into your campaign, whether it's like certain villains or specific part like good NPCs that are going to come along and aid them, or magic items, or like big things that you want your campaign to be about. You can move them, you can change elements about them to fit the moments and the fun that your players are following. And that's when you get those moments of a player, and I'm not advocating lying to your players, but it's the fun part of like them not knowing. It's the magic trick. It's them not
Yeah.
knowing what you did or didn't prep and learning to riff and give and take with the player of like, oh, like, the campaign that we played in Shattered Magic where I was thoroughly, with consent, gaslighting the crap out of one of these players, like as their warlock patron, and just like screwing with his mind of what his reality was and how it played into stuff. But 70+% of that was in the moment decisions that then I would
Right.
kind of retcon things about my lore or my floating narratives. I'd make some adjustments so that when they tied in together, it was like, I planned that the whole time. Like, no, I didn't. Like, I worked with
Yeah.
Will without him knowing to develop that for his character. But
Yeah.
on the front end, I had things prepared like a skeleton, like
Mhm.
3 floating skeletons that are like, put meat
Right.
on me. And then in the moment, you're like, that skeleton, come here. There's some meat. Now you're part of this moment. That's
Yeah.
kind of how I view campaign prep.
Oh, for sure. And listen, whether you're gonna do like a full homebrew campaign or if you're going to do a module, uh, give your players some freedom to do what they want.
Yeah,
I know you have a story that you want to tell. But often like players are coming to these games and they are super excited about whatever world you're going to be running, and they want to explore it. They really do. For example, if you're going to be running Faerun, you got Waterdeep, you've got the whole Sword Coast, you've got Thay, you
try
have
try not the
places.
Sword Coast, by the way. Just try anywhere
Try
else.
not to, yeah, go anywhere else. You
Thay
can
is
set it in
awesome.
Faerun,
Yeah,
but like Thay, just next door. Cormir, also just next
yeah,
door. Like,
right.
and they're so rarely touched on, and there's lore for them because there's
Yep.
books about them. You can definitely allow your players that freedom to go, hey, I'd like to, I don't know, like we're traveling. This isn't terribly far out of the
Yeah,
way. Can we make a stop in Neverwinter and see the wizard colleges?
right.
Hell yeah, you can. I'm running Call of the Netherdeep and Exandria campaigns right now. And my players have asked me to go places, right? And it has made the game better by me going, yeah,
Sure, why
why
not?
not?
Yeah,
You want to go down to the Vermalock Wildwood, this mysterious forest of red trees, and see what's there? Let's find out what's there
yeah,
together. And I put some stuff there, right?
yep,
And now they're like, cool, we want to go to Rosanna. It's like, cool. You're at a point in the campaign to where you can take a break
yeah,
from the main story and go anywhere in the world you want to go. Because they're like, hey, we don't really want to teleport. That's the option that was given to us, was teleport by the book. And I was like, you don't want
eh,
to teleport. We can sail around this little flat globe.
yeah,
Sorry, this the campaign 3 reference there. But and it's going to not only make it more fulfilling for your players,
yeah,
it's going to make it more fulfilling for you because you're on your toes
yep,
and you don't know what's going to happen next, and you can work in those little encounters with the big bads forces. You can throw in the thing you were going to have in this city. Well, oh, that cultist is actually over in this city
right.
now, and it is stuff that is always easy and in flux. So always keep your events movable,
Flexible. Now,
module.
and here's the fun. So 2 things. One, next I want to talk about something we talked about before the podcast, which is railroads, because they're good and bad, right? People use it usually
Yeah,
as a negative word, but the other thing, just specifically to what you just said about events being flexible, everything that we're saying also has a equal and opposite inverse, because
yeah,
sometimes putting a clock on a campaign is the most interesting thing that you can do,
yeah.
where it's like, actually there is a fixed event and there's this thing coming, but guess what, anything between now and then, what do you want to do?
It's good.
Right. And so
Exactly.
so again, the theme of this podcast is mostly about prep, but we're going to kind of get into campaign structure as well, because you have to think about that when it comes to what are you going to run? Again, we also
Yeah.
mentioned systems, which, DJ and I have both, if you're new to the podcast, try out Cypher System by Monty Cook Games.
Yeah.
Big
Absolutely.
fans. But what I want to talk about a little bit is when you've built a campaign and I'll say you've earned a lot of equity with the players about them feeling immersed, them like knowing there's a lot of cool stuff out there. Once you've kind of gotten to that spot, like I'd say 30% through a campaign, whatever the length is, usually you get to this kind of sweet spot. I feel that's kind of unspoken with, understood that it's effectively a living, breathing world. They've seen consequences play out. They've felt agency to go and do something that they kind of realized maybe wasn't prepped, but they are able to say no to the meta knowledge and follow the fun. And they see you doing
Right.
it too. When they get to that moment, I think that might be the most magical moment in a campaign because now the players feel consequences, they feel freedom, and they feel that they've been respected as a player, I think, in a very
Mhm.
special way. One of my
Yeah.
favorite moments. And then where I'm at right now in a game you're in that we've been running for over a year, we are maxed out in terms of power level. We are at the
Right.
end of honestly, like I've already said this to all of my players. We are at the end of any sort of prep I ever did for this campaign. Whoa, there we go. We're at the end of any sort of prep that I ever did for this campaign. And I have ideas of where things are going to go, but the party has grown in power, influence. They are a major player faction in the world. They can kind of do whatever they want.
Yeah,
I'm
we're
not
kind of
in charge
defining lore at this
anymore.
point.
I'm not in charge anymore. And so I'm not prepping these sessions. I maybe
No,
read
yeah.
up on some of my own lore that I've established for some of the other factors and factions and the weird stuff that's going on that they still don't know about. But at the end of the day, I've earned so much equity with them of building out this world and letting them play with it and me not actually be the end all be all control of what's happening in the world.
Yeah. It's
It's the
nice.
most magical thing. I don't prep and they're my favorite sessions.
Yeah, because we have ideas for how we would like to affect the universe,
Yeah.
how we would like to affect the game. Yeah, at this point, essentially the universe, right?
Yep.
Where we're like, cool, like we have ideas for how like this world, fast forward in 1,000 years,
Yeah.
could be so widely affected, and like the whole time and it's a campaign with two other game masters, three other
Yeah.
game masters. I think Lou also runs games occasionally. So like we're all thinking much bigger and much like just a larger scope in general
Well, and it's
than
that
our
kind of
own
campaign,
story.
right? It's
It
it's a
really is.
campaign where I've given you guys a lot of that stuff, but your own ambitions have led you down that path to become
Yeah.
a major player in the universe. And then I went, okay, um, you got it. Like you've
Yeah.
built characters to do these things, and I consent as a dungeon master to letting you run amok. That being
Yeah.
said, to cue up the Keyleth, we're basically gods kind of moment, like
I'm
I would say
gonna turn into a
you guys
goldfish.
still think I hope I'll ask it as a question. You still feel stakes and a threat out there, right? Like you don't feel like there's
Oh
no
yeah,
potential for
100%.
consequence. Okay, right. So
Because
like
listen, all it takes is for me to spend my entire load
which you've done.
trying to kill whatever I've been lucky on
Yeah.
being able to kill the things that I've been able to kill. Like we're getting to the point to where like I'm still rolling against a 6 like on the die,
Yeah.
and that means I can still fail,
It's like
right?
20% chance over that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And so it's a low chance, but there's a chance, and
Yep.
like so there's still danger, there is still paths to go.
Mhm.
I'm just it's funny because like it's your world, but I'm sitting there thinking, cool, so after the campaign and time has passed, we have we have we have an android race, we got the
Right.
human race, we got a
We've
hybrid
got 2
race of
cults we
we've
started.
got aliens. We started 2 cults, one with the aliens, one with the
Yeah,
robot people. We got, like and it's just, like,
yeah,
cool. All of a sudden, you have the basis for an actual, like, setting module
yeah.
with lore, with characters, with
Mhm.
everything you need to go, "Cool, here's your player character choices," like, and
Now,
what that means.
what I'd say is because we'll one day we'll probably do some campaign review episodes. It was actually something we talked about in doing this episode, but I was like, I wanna do an episode about this kind of more generically because, like, I wanna give as much advice as I can about being able to create these moments, and then I wanna talk
Yeah.
and nerd about our campaigns because every DM wants to, but it's not
Oh,
always
yeah.
entirely valuable. But what I wanna get to is how specifically that campaign that we're in right now, it's called Tome. Um, so for Tome, the main reason that I have felt a change in my preparation and my DMing style is, 1, playing different games. Not just the fact
Oh,
that we're
yeah,
playing
definitely.
Cypher, but the fact that we're trying a bunch of games, right? Like, even down to, an episode that's coming out before this one, where we played through The Zone, and it was GM-less,
Yeah.
and the ways that started to influence how I approach things. Also, I think, there's a lot of discourse on D&D, TikTok, TitterPig, TikTok about, the camera right now. Been seeing a lot of videos about the camera.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it was kind of popularized, at least in a very public way by Abria a while
Oh, yeah.
back. And
Yep.
then there was like a podcast that or like a roundtable that Abria and Brennan were on and stuff. But basically just the way of taking the players versus the characters
Mhm.
away from moments with their players and showing them greater things about the universe and driving the narrative of the game even when it is with the characters much more as if you're watching a movie. That's super influenced how I play, but also how I prep. Because
Yeah.
I'll maybe prep a moment and that's all my notes. And when I say a moment,
Yeah.
I've got 4 bullet points, baby. Right?
Yep.
Like I'm like, I want to start session on this moment and then see where these idiots go. Right? Like
Absolutely.
that's it. And Cypher is the other big factor that I want to touch on. So, DJ, how has
Yeah.
Cypher changed your prepping? Cuz I can go on for
So
400
much.
hours.
You know, as a game master for hire, I make a living off of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. I still love it, right?
Yep.
I do love Dungeons and Dragons. I very much enjoy Cypher a little bit more, but a lot of the things have carried over into my Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition
Yeah.
game. Things like rewarding failures and like trying to keep things simple, while allowing, like, the players to make the decisions,
Yeah.
right? Instead of it being because with D&D, and I've been in a few games lately, with some very good dungeon masters,
Mhm.
and game masters, where it felt weak because I know that they have a story that they wanna tell, and it's a very good story, and I'm still having a really good time. But I, from Cypher, have gotten to the point where I want to interject and, like, go, "Yeah, but what if we could
Right.
do this?"
Yep.
Right? What if we and so now when I
So,
run
real
Dungeons& and
quick, I'm
Dragons
gonna
5th
pause you.
edition. Oh,
I'm
yeah. Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
So what just because I know, but for our listeners that haven't played Cypher, what about Cypher lets you do that isn't maybe common in other systems?
Yeah. So there is the player intrusion in Cypher system, also the game master intrusion. So you can kind of go back and forth on it.
Yeah.
But with Cypher, because it is very much a negotiation in a way with your game master, not as much as some games. I've heard that I think Gorps or
GURPS. Yeah.
probably yeah, I've heard that it can be that way. I've heard some where, it's very much you're just talking and like
Mhm.
negotiating with the game master. Cypher has this really nice balance of like it's still a game with set mechanics that are very fluid.
And
And
simple.
that fluidity and simple, it's so simple. And that fluidity and that simplicity allows the players to make decisions and have agency in a way that they might not in Dungeons and
Yeah.
Dragons 5th edition. And so not everything in my Dungeons and Dragons games comes down to a role,
Yeah.
because if they can talk to me and convince me as to why they can do something or why they should be able to do something, why the hell not? The
Yeah.
power scaling in Dungeons and Dragons definitely allows it,
Yeah.
even if it's not baked into the system,
So on
and
that,
it is baked into Cypher.
I think, yeah. So I was gonna say, I think the a good example parallel would be something that actually happened a lot at my table back in the day with 5e that didn't have rules support, and frankly, I said no to it a lot. Which was my wife asked one question all the time. What was that question, DJ? Do
Oh, shoot.
I have
Have advantage. Do I
Do
have
I have
advantage?
advantage? Why would you have advantage, Emily?
Why would you have
Um,
advantage?
But okay, so why is she
Funny
asking
thing
that?
about that. Yeah,
But
no,
why
funny
is she
thing about
asking that? She's saying, I
Because she
feel
should.
like I might have an advantage here, and she has
Exactly.
some rationale.
Mhm.
Why wouldn't that have support?
Absolutely. So, I played in a game with Justin from So You Want to Be a DM. Go check out their podcast. It's fantastic. Friends of the show. I played in this one shot in Justin's homebrew world. And I've been playing a certain way for so long with certain home rules that I forgot that they weren't even home.
Oh,
For
right.
example, um this one kind of made me laugh, but Justin had this setup for the final boss that we were going into. And like there was a slightly elevated area. I was a ranged character, and for years
Yep.
we have
Height
played
advantage.
with height advantage, the high ground. And so many people on the internet believe that this is a part of 5th edition that
Doesn't make
is not
sense.
there. But it makes
Yeah.
sense because a ranged fighter at a higher vantage point is able to easily, or not easily,
Pick
have
out
an
their
easier
target.
time
Yeah.
hitting them because of gravity,
Yeah.
right? And because of
Well,
the
and
angle
sight
and the
lines and
trajectory.
every reason.
Everything. Also, you look up at them, real hard to hit them because, you have to aim up.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was like, oh yeah, this is obviously a thing. I said it with such confidence that that Justin
It's
straight
like a
up was
little
like, "Oh,
embarrassing.
yeah, that makes sense. I didn't know that." And then of course, like a week later, Justin makes a video on TikTok, is a multiple choice. Which one of these things gives you advantage? And which one doesn't? And it
Yeah.
was height
Yep.
advantage. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm
Whoopsie.
so sorry, Justin. I genuinely believe."
Yeah. So
And it's
to that
because
point,
it makes sense.
so again, just to talk about why we like Cypher in a succinct way. In this case, again, we're talking about prep here. So what this does is it fundamentally changes the way that your player interfaces with advantages and challenges in terms of simplicity. Okay. Super simple version is Cypher boils down to one thing, that is the difficulty rating essentially for
Yep.
the encounter or the challenge or the monster. You can
Yeah.
almost rely on just that singular number to run a whole ass session. I have ran entire sessions on with multiple creatures and monsters and stuff like that where I wrote nothing down. They were not existing stat blocks, and I did not track much at all except for what was probably like a rough health threshold or something like that.
Oh,
So
yeah, absolutely.
other than that, it's like I wrote down essentially level 7 and then I wrote down 86 health or whatever. And that's from learning the system. That's not just like a super random number, but that's it. And so
Yeah.
what Cypher has allowed me to do is to not have to sit down and make a custom stat block for
Right.
a creature in 5e specifically and other crunchy systems and Pathfinder and all that stuff, where I kind of have to justify why I'm doing what I'm doing to the players. Like I remember back in the day running stuff and some players being like, wait, why is this monster doing that? Because it was like, let's say it was a
That monster
shadow.
doesn't typically have
Right.
this. Yeah.
Right. It's like you're breaking the rules. And I think there's room for that kind of a table. Like, I'm not saying be a
Absolutely.
dick to your dungeon master. I'm just saying there are definitely times where you're running 5e so like straightforward that you're basically only running stuff out of a monster manual. That's stuff you discuss in
Yeah.
a session 0. But like I couldn't run a 5e game as easily. Right, I'd have to find a stat block that felt like it was slightly appropriate, maybe reskin the visuals of what it was, and then say, okay, this is what I'm going to play. I'd have to make a lot of decisions in advance,
Right.
or be really well versed with that monster manual in advance. Again, that's basically prep. Whereas Cypher, I kind of can go with the flow, pick a number, and make sure that I'm adequately challenging my players, creating something interesting, and respecting their choice and their like creative exertion in what story they want to pursue.
And the
So
beauty
yeah,
about that is like with Cypher and with Cypher system like stat blocks and with how weapons work, it's all very simple and easy to reskin and
yeah,
reflavor in any way that you would like. And so it kind of trains you to do that. All right, cool. So this bad guy hits for 5 points of damage, right? This bad guy has one, point of armor,
yeah,
and this bad guy has this much health and is this difficulty. Easy, and all you have to do is flavor it. So, how is he attacking?
yep,
How is that 5 points of damage, being distributed?
yep,
And that's super nice in a way that fifth edition makes that a lot harder. I'm
yeah,
starting to do it a little bit more though.
yeah,
Right. And so it's like I just need to know what weapons this guy's using.
mm-hmm,
And if he has a spell, cool. I don't use spell slots for
yeah,
NPCs because like all it takes is like, cool, we've run down their spell
yeah.
slots. And it's like, all right,
Challenge gone.
cool. Challenge
Well, and
gone.
so with the 5e side too, just mechanically, there's just so much more going on, which is not bad. That's fun often.
No, absolutely.
But what's tricky is like you're like, okay, well, what's their wisdom? Because this is a wisdom save thing. Right. So you got to decide, oh, well, what's their wisdom score? What should I be adding to this to be fair?
Right.
And then if you're deciding this arbitrarily because you decided to run a monster like that and you're trying to do what I'm describing for Cypher, you got to be mechanically consistent. So you're like writing down and building a stat block as you go to respect the
Yeah.
players and maintain some
Mhm.
consistency in what you're doing and what challenge you're putting up against them. And that's not fun for me at all. So what I ended up doing when I was running 5e all the time, it was mainly just reskinning. So I'd find something feverishly that felt like the right stat block that maybe had some interesting abilities, the right number of multi-attacks. I'd be like, cool, this is roughly the CR that I think it should be. This is what I'm running. And it would be
Yeah.
quick and on the fly. Now, when it comes to prep, outside of glorifying Cypher um and all that, you're running more campaigns than I've ever ran simultaneously. I'm a huge
6
fan of
right now.
Obsidian. That's how I organize my
Yeah.
multiple worlds in campaigns. If you're not familiar with it, really quick 2 seconds on that. Obsidian is a markdown language based notation tool. If you're familiar with Notion, it works a lot like that. It's a far more organized and simple way to handle things than like Google Docs or a notebook. We have talked about it quite a bit in our tools episode. If you haven't checked it out, we'll also probably
Definitely.
do a deep dive on it one day because I'm a big
Definitely
fan.
coming another one because I
Yeah.
just started using Pocket Bard because I
Yeah.
got into the closed beta for
Very
the
cool.
desktop thing. So yeah, new tools episode definitely on the horizon. The landscape changes from week to
Constantly.
week for us. Uh,
So
so
yeah,
it's nice.
question is, how are you? One, let me make a mini question first. How are you doing this mechanically? And 2, like, what is that like? Because I don't want to run that many campaigns and juggle them where
You don't want to know.
well, okay, but like you're running multiple, sometimes you're running the same module with 2 different groups in the same setting. Sometimes
5
you're
different
running,
groups. 4
sometimes you're
different
running the
groups, sorry.
same setting with a bunch of different groups and they're running different modules and then they all have their own canon, right? Like they effectively have their own version. They're in the multiverse. They're their own version. That breaks my brain. Tell me
So, it's
about
really
that.
funny. because I haven't taken notes once
You're the
on
devil.
any of these.
No, I'm just kidding.
And I don't know how I do it. I do know. I know. It's the ADHD thing. Like it's just how my brain compartmentalizes entertaining information.
Mhm.
But the funny thing is, even if, say, we had to cancel 2 weeks in a row, I
Yeah.
can tell you exactly what my players did for the entire session and where they're going and what their plans are,
Yeah.
for all 5 groups that I'm currently running paid games for. And my free, friends game, on Monday night, and I do take notes for the actual play because, it matters there. But, like,
Not for the
it's
paid
it's
games.
it's
No.
so well, here's the thing. It's so funny because, like, at first I thought I was going to need to. I record every session just in case I need to go back and
Right.
listen to it in case I've forgotten. So, in a sense, I do have
Yeah,
notes.
you have no.
But I haven't needed to rely on them
Yeah.
yet, because for one, I'm running kind of like a few hybrid module things going on. So, for those of you who don't know, I've been running an Exandria game that is like one part homebrew, one part Call of the Netherdeep, and now one part Vecna Eve of Ruin that is going to kind of like capstone the campaign off. And I just remember
That's crazy.
I
So
I remember conversations,
I
but
would
Obsidian
say
is great.
my so when I have been running more than one, and what I think may be the most generic-y advice I think I could give to somebody, for any table, this is such good advice just in general. I'm so good at giving it. No, is be a fan of the players. I think would be
Oh,
my answer.
absolutely.
If you are invested in these stories, you'll remember stuff that otherwise you might
Yeah.
not, right? Like, because
I
I
yeah,
know you're a fan of your players, right? So,
I
like,
love them so much.
if you take the time to build these worlds with your players, like the ways that I have benefited from the players in my tome game, and I felt like I get to watch a movie every
Yeah,
week that is incredible, that I got to be a part of. And especially now at this point in the campaign, like
yeah.
we've talked about it, I get to show up. I'm not really doing a lot of work anymore. I'm adjudicating.
Mhm.
I'm making some decisions, but I have no idea what these idiots are going to do to the universe that I put them in. And it's a blast because I'm watching a show based on an idea that I had. And
Yeah.
that is nuts. Like that's
Oh,
like
it's great.
it's the best. So I think
Yeah.
my theory for why you do it and you're able to do it other than your ADHD superpowers is I know just of you as a person that you're a huge fan of your players. And that's
Yeah.
advice I would give to anyone to check themselves on as a DM, as GM,
Yeah.
whatever. Um always, making sure you are a huge fan of your players and their
Mhm.
characters and why they're doing what they're
Mhm.
doing in their story.
I was so worried in the beginning, about, like, doing game mastering for hire as, like, what if there's this arm's length, like, professional
Right.
relationship between me and my
Yeah.
players? Come to find out, not even a thing.
Now we're
They're like,
buddies.
"I'm happy to pay you. I make $120,000 a year doing this thing, and I love
Yeah.
being your friend and playing in games with you." And I'm like, "You know what? I love you too, and this is great." And so, yeah, I have become so close to all of my players. At this
Yeah.
point, I have 34
That's crazy, dude.
players. Um And it's great. I have 34 people that, like, I get to hang out with for 3 hours at a time every week
Yeah.
and hear them tell me an awesome story, and I can give you an example. Um, my buddy, you know who, Drew, he was like, "Hey, I'm not gonna be able to make it for either most of, if not all of this session." And I was like, "Okay, cool. Just so you know, this entire portion of the campaign and city does rely on your character, um, because he's got the MacGuffin, right?
Right.
Like he's got the
It was built for
item that
him.
they need to know. And so I told the other players, I was like, "Hey, just so you know, like, I did have some things, like, prepped by reading the book for that part of the campaign. But I will say most of it does rely on the whole chosen one thing.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, no, no, we got this. Like, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out." And I was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, I think we will. We'll just do some other stuff." And they did. For
Yeah.
2 hours, we touched basically like one or two of the plot points that didn't necessitate that the chosen one be
Sure.
around.
Yeah.
And from there, they did other things. And they kind of took things
Beach
off the
episode.
rails and did things out of order and like
Yeah.
talked to characters and just had conversations.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, this was such a fun session. And like, you guys did so much like
Yeah.
legwork and I appreciated it. And then Drew popped in at the end, and I was like, "Oh, even better. We're still gonna cover the
There
the
you
the
go.
things that I was planning on covering in this last hour." And it was amazing. It was one of the best sessions that we have ever done.
Mm,
And it took so little prep work.
yeah.
I just said, "Here's the map. What do you want to do?" And
So
it's been great.
so on that, and again, so I touched on it
Yeah,
earlier, the idea of railroads. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the terminology, which a lot of people are, so I'm not, you know, saying anything crazy here. Railroads basically means, uh, hmm, how do I make this really simple without over explaining it? Playing Final Fantasy VII, right?
yeah,
This a railroaded, not RPG game, essentially. It is a story you're playing through. That would
yeah,
be the worst example of it. I'm not saying Final Fantasy VII is a bad example of a game that's good. I love that game. But I'm saying like from a having agency in a
yeah,
story perspective, it is I'm here to play the mechanics of the
yeah.
challenges, but I'm not really allowed to adjust the prepared story.
Right,
Surprise, surprise, that's not how DJ and I run games at all. It's
right.
not how a lot of people run games, to be very clear. But when you are getting
Honestly,
into
yeah,
this, when you're getting into this and you start to read these modules, especially if you're reading 5th edition published stuff and
yep.
that's where you're starting, um, you'll probably start to experience, at least I'll talk about myself. I started to experience a panic that I was going to break the game. I was going to break this module and it would become chaos and have to just homebrew everything because I wouldn't know everything in this book so that I could run them down the right path and journey and whatever. And the first module I ran was Curse of Strahd. Um, it's a sandbox, so it kind of worked for me a
Really
little bit
is,
in that
yeah.
way. But what I'm saying is what railroading is really eliminating a lot of options for your players to curate a more narrow story
Mhm.
experience. That
Yeah,
can be really bad. That
yeah.
can be some of the best games you ever played. I have
Here's the
had
spectrum.
players like you and Will before have said to me like railroad us these two sessions, like take us where you want to go. We love
Yeah,
what we're doing. Take us there. And there's other times like, hey, we just kind of want to fuck around. We want to go like
yeah,
poke a bear in the woods and see what happens. It's like,
yeah.
okay, let's go.
Here's my thing. So, like, there's a spectrum, right? And we can use the video game analogy where it's like railroading shouldn't be um Call of Duty campaign,
Yeah,
right? Where it's literally just this event, stories told.
yeah,
You can play games like that. Some people like playing games like that. That's fine. It's not for me.
yep.
Then there's on the far side of that, right? There is something that is closer to
Improv.
improv, which is going to be something like Sons of the Forest or Valheim, right? There's no
Yeah.
guide. There's none of like you do what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like the more closer to the railroading side of the spectrum where it feels more like the world is open. And so like
Like
you have your
Stardew.
Final Fantasy sevens, the original. You have the Outer Worlds. I think the Outer Worlds does this really well where you go on a planet, you're open, you can do the things, but like you still have to like progress to the next area.
Yep.
So that's another good kind of inspiration to take is like, cool, here's this big open area. And then take that step even further, Divinity Original Sin 2 and Baldur's Gate 3,
Yeah.
where it is a large open area that your players can explore, but once they're done with it, they're going to move on to the next area and they're going to do it all again. And they're probably not going to go back to the previous area, but they can if they want. Right. And so
I
yeah,
kind of view
that's
those
my kind of visual philosophy.
I kind of view the divinity kind of example as I feel like I used to call it something. It's like maybe it was like gates in plains or whatever. Yeah, it was kind of based on the idea of Breath of the Wild, right? So you've got like your Great Plateau where you start
Yeah.
out, it's kind of your tutorial area, but
And
it's
it's
still a
huge.
sandbox. It's bigger than any Zelda game and it's just the
Yeah.
Great Plateau. Um
Yep. It's
and
the
it's
tutorial.
like it's the tutorial, but it's still a sandbox, right?
Yeah.
You still put up a boundary for your players. If we're paralleling this in a game, if you set up a beginning area, you're like, I know that this is roughly the rails on a game. I'll make it a more specific example. You're in a sci-fi setting. Okay, so you're just like, right now they don't have a spaceship. They're stuck on this planet. That's your tutorial zone,
Yeah.
right? One, a planet's huge. Um,
Absolutely.
so you got a lot of options,
Yeah.
but you've limited them to experiencing the world through a more narrow lens at this point. You have
Yeah.
control of that amount. And then that first gate to go to another plane of existence essentially is getting a ship. Now they have a ship and they can go wherever they want, right?
There's places to experience. Yeah.
And then you get
Just
to start to play with the levers of like, well, what are the limitations on space travel? Do they have unlimited fuel? Probably not. So are we going to limit them by way of fuel economy and money? Or in my case, like I did it because you literally don't have access to faster than light travel without basically being audited by the
yeah.
cops. And so that was a way that the players were limited to
Yeah.
just go wherever they want, which helped me focus that experience and curate it. So it's this
Yeah.
idea of like you put your players in sandboxes and you know they will be kind of like stuck there until they cross a pretty specific or a few specific thresholds to then enter into another level of complexity or like area of the campaign like in
Yeah.
Divinity or like in Baldur's Gate because like once they cross that point the game's never going to be the same and
Right.
they have complete like the again with Tome as our example the amount of ability and power that my party has is wild. They own a mega corporation. They have, I'm not going to get into all of it, but they own a mega corporation. They started out as just like low level dudes on the street looking for a job. And it's like, so now they have a level of influence. Like if you get there too quick, one, it does not make sense just from a story perspective. But two, it's actually not fun. It makes the
No.
world too big too quick, and then you kind of have like a goldfish problem. Like they fill the
I have
space,
an
and then it
example
feels
of that one.
small. You know what I mean? Go ahead.
Yeah. So I know we're not a video game podcast, but great
Yet,
inspiration from video games. Honestly, you never know what'll happen. But
right?
so you talking about that and the goldfish problem is what I realized my biggest gripe with Starfield was. Because the moment I could go anywhere in the entire universe of
Ooh.
500,000
Yeah.
planets, it became too much and overwhelming. Whereas I would have much preferred that they kept the fuel mechanic in there and that they would have kept like the slow expansion in there because
Yeah.
you have to upgrade your fuel systems. You have to do this. You have to all of that was scrapped. And so like I
Starfield
would say
is a great cautionary tale. Not okay. People
yeah.
love the game. I'm not shitting on the game.
No,
It's a
absolutely.
great cautionary tale for storytelling, though,
Mhm.
because to your point, right? So you arrive on a planet in Starfield, if you're not familiar with it, and you got a couple curated places. This is how I build things in my game, right? You got a couple curated places, like locations where things
Yeah.
can happen, and then they actually can change because the game works like that. Like where it might happen for one player to another
And
person's
it doesn't for another, yeah.
right, and then the rest is kinda just procedurally generated around them, and it's not it's empty. It's very empty,
It's empty.
and, like,
Yeah.
that is a problem that you can run into is like from a this is a okay, as a white dude, this is a big problem that I wrestled with early on in telling a space opera level scale. I'm like, I don't want to colonize an entire universe with just my perspective and monoculture every planet and every city. I want there to be diversity in these places that like I'm creating, but I got to look into how other cultures handle these things and making sure that these
Yeah.
characters feel unique and have different perspectives. And that's, a world building thing and just a ethos kind of thing. But like
Right. An awareness thing.
yeah, maybe try and have diverse perspectives. But
Yeah,
like
yeah.
in the Starfield example, it's like finding ways. The good side is you put them on a planet, have a thing for them to do, right? Don't just have it be a blank planet because there's a planet there for a reason.
Yeah.
But like make sure that they're not just gonna just be like, okay, we want to go explore out in the wilderness and be like, by the way, guys, I have nothing prepped outside of this little outpost. It's like, it's actually okay if you get in that situation because of a lot of other things. That's okay. Actually, telling your players is probably a good idea rather than like
Yeah, yeah.
running a bad
It's
session. But
yep.
also, the other option is finding ways to riff and pull on floating narratives and decide that things are on that planet. This is what
Yep.
Starfield didn't do, right? Like started wandering around wanting to find things like you do in other video games like Breath of the Wild or whatever, where you would look under a
Mhm.
rock and it would be a whole nother spiraling adventure, but you would go out into Starfield and you're like, okay, I'm just walking. That
Yep.
can't happen in tabletop.
No, absolutely not, because, here's the thing, um, you have to prep for those sessions
Yeah.
more than you have to prep for the other sessions. That's what I've found.
Yeah.
Travel sessions take a lot of work, and, Starfield doesn't have to worry about that because you at least get to look at the scenery.
Yeah. Now,
Um,
with
yeah.
travel sessions, again, future episode all on travel probably. Um,
Yeah.
but I love travel sessions when it comes to floating narrative because when I feel a lull in this, however many like if we're doing a long like maybe like a 2 session stint where we're going from point A to B, um, I get to feel out one, like opportunities where players are role playing and something's
Mhm.
coming up, and I can like pick up on the vibe of like, ooh, this person's trauma is rising to a head narratively.
Yeah.
I can stick a knife in that, right? Like, and
Huh,
then being able to pull it's like, yeah, by the way, maybe
I
not
can murder an
literally putting
NPC.
maybe not literally putting the thing they fear the most in the way, but
Yeah.
maybe they're traveling through a graveyard, and by traveling through that graveyard, some spirits are there that are malicious and they kind of bogger, something into existence that awakens this horror in this person. Like, I was just dreading this thing. I know it's not literally here, but I am quite literally facing my fears right now. That happened.
Yeah.
Why? Because I was listening, because I
Yep.
was a fan of the players, because I was invested in their narrative, and I decided they were going through a graveyard and I wanted to mess with
Yeah.
them. Right? Like, that's it.
Yep. So funny you should use that exact example. Is one of my players when if you're listening, love you. You're great. Um they have very specific player character fears. And one of those is because their character
Player fears or
was
character fears? Sorry.
player character fears. So like their character
The
has
character.
fears.
Got it. Okay. I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
wait,
I don't
which
want to
one?
scare my players sometimes.
Real. I'm
Uh
scaring the shit out of them.
but her character is essentially the synopsis showed up in the Feywild as a baby and was raised by blink dogs in a blink dog culture, and super great. She grew up with a family, but she has a problem. She's a human. She ages much slower. The blink dogs are dying. She's losing her family, and she just left the Feywild where time works differently. And so she's been echoing this fear of, I don't want to be alone. I left the only family I knew I had behind to see if I
Mm,
could go find my family. and currently she's undergoing some trials because she decided to take a level in Druid. And had this super fun thing where it's like, here's all of the tenets of Melora and
Yeah.
like, how this relates to your character. And then they get over the mountain into Blightshore and they're heading down and the trials are still continuing and it's oppose undeath. And in it is this graveyard. And I was like, oh, I want to do Call of Duty Zombies. I
Yeah.
want
Horde
this to
mode.
I want this to be horde mode because it's gonna be fun. And so that's what I did. And the very first thing that she saw to enact the whole horde mode was an undug grave. Or sorry, a dug grave with a casket that's been lowered into it and a plaque that has her given last name, not because she doesn't know what her actual last name is. And it's
Right.
just the last name and it says died unclaimed. And she about flipped out on that. And then we started it and it was one of the most real
Man.
and deep like
Yeah.
it's funny because Penny is like, are you guys often being traumatized in your games? And I was like, sometimes the players want it. Sometimes the players
Sometimes
ask
they
me
want it.
to poke them,
Traumatize me,
uh,
daddy.
poke them in the heart and make them
Yeah.
feel something. And so
Yeah.
we ended that session, and it was the battle finished, and she says, "All right, Valley is going to drop down to her knees, and she is going to cry."
Yeah.
And all of the other players just
Roll for
like
tears.
roll for tears, and all of the other players basically began to just one at a time like, hey, this isn't true,
Yeah.
right? Because we're your family.
Yep.
We're here. We don't have to be traveling with you. We met you random. And so it's like it's this real deep like, oh, okay, cool. And so now we're getting over these things. And the nice thing is this episode will air after
Yeah.
we've concluded that
Now,
whole
but my
session.
question then
But
is,
yeah.
but what did you actually prep
What did I actually prep?
for that? For that
A
whole
gra
moment,
a graveyard. That's it.
right? And that's the
I s
episode, folks.
Yep. I saw a wound,
Yeah.
and I was like, "You know what? It's time to poke it." And it was just a random spur of the moment thing because she asked, what does the label on the coffin say?" And I just
Blink.
said, "You
Mm.
know what? This whole thing is about you,
Yeah.
and so I'm going to dive deep into that."
Yeah.
And so that's what we do. So yeah, uh
Yeah.
I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode because we absolutely we love storytelling. We love uh you know planning these crazy campaigns. We love all of it. We love TTRPGs. And we just want to use our experience and the things that have worked for us in order to help you and us become better storytellers. That's the whole point of One Shots Tavern. And so if you like that, please check out the Patreon. It's $5 a month. You get access to an exclusive part of the Discord. You can make it happen. And of course, we have merch. So let me stand up real quick. But this magic missile tee was designed by Andrew. It's beautiful. It's comfortable. It fits. You can find that on our website, oneshotstavern.com. Anything you'd like to throw in there, Andrew?
Yeah. Guys, check out our amazing new actual play put entirely together by our lovely DJ Baker here. And it is it's phenomenal. I haven't gotten that far into it because I'm a busy dad, but man, oh man, these
And
players are phenomenal. They are amazing
yes, they
improvisational
are.
players. They are funny. They are fun. Please check it out. It is called The Eye of the Tyrant, and it is like a space opera. They're all in prison at the beginning of it. It's a fun, different way to start a game. And I think you guys will have a blast. Like DJ mentioned, there's going to be an episode airing soon here. He's doing them 3 weeks, so that's on Wednesdays. It's going to be airing 3 times a
First
month,
3 weeks
and
of
then
yep.
on they'll be taking a break on the fourth one each month. But yeah, guys, it's a really fun game. Please check it out if you haven't. Thank you guys for listening. This has been a blast. Let us know some of your favorite tips and tricks for campaign prepping and session prep. And we will talk to you guys very soon. Drop a comment, leave a like. You guys are amazing. Have a good
See
one.
you next week.